If you've checked your mailbox lately, you may have seen one of these. Before you toss it in the pile with the rest of your junk mail, hear me out. Residents of Washington State, the contents inside that envelope matter especially to you. This year is a midterm general election year, meaning we aren't voting on who will be our next president, but there are plenty of other equally important items on this year's ballot. We'll get to those a little later. So, according to the U.S. Census Bureau, there are over 3.9 million registered voters in Washington State, but only 81% of those voters turned out in 2012, the last presidential election year. And voter turnout for midterm elections are typically 10 to 20% less than that. If every Washington State resident attending a University of Washington school right now turned out and voted, assuming they're all registered to vote, we could make up over 1% of the entire state's voter population. This year, we've got 3 initiatives on the ballot. First is initiative number 1351, also known as the Washington Class Size Reduction Measure. So here's the story. Washington State ranks 47th out of 50 states in class size, according to the National Education Association, which is also the largest teachers union. This measure would allow the state to allocate funds to reduce class sizes and increase staffing for students. Here's the facts. New spending would be phased over 4 years. Grades K through 3 will have no more than 15 to 17 students. Grades 4 through 12, no more than 22 to 25. 1351 would require school districts to create 25,561 new staff positions, but 71% of those hired wouldn't even be classroom teachers. They'd be teaching assistants, counselors, psychologists, and administrative staff. The Washington Education Association, the teachers union that's supporting the initiative, would profit by $7.4 million a year. And here's why you should care. The initiative contains no budget or revenue source, and the money is going to need to come from somewhere. Taxes maybe, or decreasing state funding for higher education that could lead to tuition increases here at UW. But if you plan on sending your children or future children to public schools in Washington State, this can affect the type of education they receive. The next 2 initiatives are competing measures concerning firearms, I-591 and 594. 591 would forbid the state from requiring any additional background checks than what the federal government already permits. It would also make it illegal for any government agency to confiscate guns or other firearms from citizens without due process. This measure is supported by all major gun rights activist groups, the NRA, and the GOP. The counter-initiative to 591 is 594, the measure vowing to close the gun show loophole with universal background checks and gun purchases. The initiative requires the same quick and familiar background screening done by gun dealers for retail sales to be applied to purchases at gun shows and for online sales and private transactions. 594 is supported by the Washington Alliance for Gun Responsibility, as well as Bill and Melinda Gates, Steve Ballmer, Paul Allen, and former Arizona Congresswoman Gabrielle Giffords, who you may remember was shot in the head by a young man who opened fire while conducting an open-air town meeting. Alright, so here's the facts. Approximately 1 in 10 gun buyers seeking to purchase guns online in Washington are prohibited from buying or possessing guns. Also, 591 and 594 both have minimal impact on state and local revenues. With 594, background checks would not be required for gifts between immediate family members or for antiques, and there are also special exceptions for hunting ranges. Here's why you should care. More than half of the people murdered with guns in Washington State in 2011 were under the age of 30. Also, Washington State law makes it illegal for convicted felons, those convicted of certain misdemeanors and restraining orders, also people found not guilty of a crime by insanity, and those mentally incompetent to possess firearms. This measure would prevent these people from buying guns without a background check. In addition to these 3 initiatives, there are advisory votes and candidates in the U.S. congressional, state legislative, and state judicial offices up for election. Ballots must be filled out and mailed or returned to one of the many drop-off locations around Seattle by 8 p.m. on November 4th. There are students halfway across the world protesting day and night for this right we often take for granted. Exercise your freedom and your right to vote by submitting your ballot this year. And if I haven't convinced you yet, maybe Lil Jon can. Turn out for what? Turn out for what?